Hey y'all, it's Megan. If you're returning to my channel, welcome back, and if you are new, welcome aboard. Today is another Disney history and trivia video, and today is one of my kind of underrated favorite original Disney movies, and that is Peter Pan. Peter Pan is one of the pretty well-known Disney movies that came out of the original Walt Disney Animation Studios. Most people know what Peter Pan is, and most people know that it was based on a play. The play was written by J.M. Barrie, Sir James Matthew Barrie, and the play kind of evolved a lot. He kept changing it. So the original play was out in the early 1900s, like 1904, I want to say. I believe that was when the final version of the play was being performed. But there's not all that many similarities between that original play and what we know as the Disney animated classic. The original play, if you've ever read it, or any of the novels by J.M. Barrie that kind of go along with the play that he wrote, they're kind of dark. I mean, real dark. I've mentioned before that Walt was really into some really dark stories that you kind of wonder, how exactly did this inspire you to make a children's movie? I'm not sure. If you haven't seen my Pinocchio trivia video, I'll link that up there and down in the description. That was another one that was based on a pretty dark early story that Walt just adapted. In the original play, Peter is the boy who won't grow up or can't grow up or whatever. He is perpetually a young boy, and he lives in Neverland. In the movie, the Lost Boys are boys that have come to live in Neverland with Peter, and they're kind of his friends and like his little minions. Minions isn't a like a happy word, but they're like his little sidekicks, and they all are just like happy young boys that aren't growing up, and they just want to be young forever and have fun and do young little boy things. But in the play, the Lost Boys were babies that fell out of their prams when their nurses and their nannies weren't looking. They fell out of their prams, and Peter took them to Neverland. Well, if they started to grow up, if they didn't stay little boys forever, if they started to grow up, then Peter would get rid of them. I don't think they go into exact detail about what dear Peter did to the Lost Boys, but they got gone. And that was a little dark for Walt. So the Lost Boys just became Peter's friends. Peter was kind of described as a sociopath in, the original story, and Walt made him a little bit nicer, even though Walt was himself very disappointed with how the character of Peter ended up being portrayed and coming across. He thought that he was kind of cold and like unlikable, which I never got. Do y'all think that Peter's cold and unlikable? I always thought that he was kind of friendly, but anyway, Walt thought that he was really unlikable, and people were like, okay, well, yeah, I mean, he's supposed to be a sociopath, so like, let it go, Walt. They went through a lot of ideas for how the story was going to progress, and some of those ideas are a little bit strange. The early version made them start in Neverland. You don't meet the Darling Children first. You start off in Neverland and you kind of see all of that, and then you go to the Darling Children. There's another version where they thought about giving a whole bunch of Peter's backstory, and you learn how he became Peter Pan and how he got to where he is, and then he goes and he gets the Darling Children. It's like, man, that movie was going to be like forever and a half long. I don't know how they were going to get all of that crammed into one animated feature. Another version, which I think would be kind of interesting, is Nana, the dog, goes to Neverland with them, and the entire story is told from her perspective. I don't know how that was going to work, but that would have been interesting to see. That was another idea that they had. Ajax, can you stop bellowing? No, you can't? Okay. So they finally did decide that the best place to start would be just you meet the Darling Children, and then Peter immediately comes in looking for his shadow, which was a trope that was a part of the original play. So they decided to start there and then move on with the story. One more thing about the making of the movie, Roy, Walt's older brother, Roy Disney, did not like the idea of making this movie. He was so hardcore against Peter Pan from the beginning. The initial budget was $3 million in, the early 1900s, mid 1900s. And Roy's like, that is just too much money. Not happening. I don't like it. And then when the actual costs ballooned and they ended up spending about $4 million making the movie, Roy was really upset. He was like, why did we spend this much money on this story? I don't understand. But then Walt was like, hey, this is why. because they earned back $40 million on the initial run of the movie, and it has since obviously made a lot more. As always, I like to mention the firsts and lasts that are accompanying the Disney movie. So this was the first movie, the first film adaptation of Peter Pan, which there had been a few. This was the first one where Peter was actually played by a boy. Every other time Peter was played by a girl because he's supposed to be a young child, and if they got a male who was able to deliver all of the lines and kind of be the physical character that Peter is, he was going to have had his voice changed already. So that kind of took away from the kid that never grows up idea. So they made it be a woman a lot of times, and you know, just a little petite woman who had a high-pitched voice and was ready to go and be the boy who never grew up. So this was the first movie that a male actually played the part, and that was Bobby Driscoll. Along with the first, there were also a couple of lasts. This was the last Disney movie that said at the beginning, presented by RKO Radio Pictures. After that, it was Buena Vista. So this was the last one of that era. This was also the end of an even bigger era. This was the last movie that all 9 of the 9 old men worked on. After this, Ward Kimball, this was his last Disney movie that he worked on, and then from there, you know, more of the 9 old men tapered off. But this was the last one that all 9 of them worked on. Some of the fun facts, trivia about Peter Pan. In the play, Captain Hook had lost his right hand, and so that was the hand that he had his hook on. Well, when they started to make the movie, because most people are right-handed, they thought this is going to make things so much more difficult for this character. He's going to have to do things so much differently than he would if he lost his dominant hand. That's going to be hard to animate, and that's going to be limiting on the character. So you know what? He lost his left hand. Captain Hook has lost his left hand. That's what it is. He's a right-handed gentleman, and he can continue doing right-handed things because the hook is on his left hand. Everyone's favorite pixie, Tinkerbell, had only been portrayed as an actual, like, embodiment, not even really a person. She'd only been portrayed as a physical thing in that original 1924 silent movie Peter Pan, and in this one, this was only the second time. Every other time she was just like a little ball of light and some like little tinkling bells, and that was what Tinkerbell was. No one actually saw what she looked like, and when they were working to figure out what kind of sound is going to be the signature tinkle for Tinkerbell, and they came up with strips of aluminum on a string. Yep, that is some high quality sound equipment right there. It takes a lot of expertise to master that particular musical instrument, but yeah, it's a piece of string with some aluminum that they ding 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 ding, and that was the Tinkerbell noise. As always, I like to finish out my history and trivia videos talking about some of the voice actors that were working on the film, and this one is an interesting one because they kind of tie in to the play, and they kind of like make nods to that, because in the play it was common to have dual roles, and one such role was Mr. Darling was played by the same character that played Captain Hook. So they carried that through. So Hans Conried, this guy, he played Captain Hook and Mr. Darling in the film, kind of nodding to the fact that on the stage, the same actor played both of those characters. Another dual role was the person who played Nana, the dog, and the crocodile, Tick-Tock, which I don't think he had the name Tick-Tock in the play, but that's what he's called in the movie. They were played by the same voice actor. You know, the same person made the noises for those two animals. So that's why when you watch the animated classic Peter Pan, Tick-Tock kind of has some dog-like qualities. They're kind of making a nod to the fact that Tick-Tock and Nana were played by the same person. So, you know, Tick-Tock kind of does his little begging thing, and he wags his tail, and he does some kind of like typically canine things, which I thought was really cute. I mentioned before in my Alice in Wonderland history video, which I will also link down in the description for you, that Catherine Beaumont played Wendy and Alice. She also was the physical model for both of those characters, and she has continued to do the voices for those characters kind of throughout her life. Margaret Kerry was the voice of the red-headed mermaid, though we were only trying to drown her, that mermaid. She was that voice, but she was also the physical model for Tinkerbell. And she was a very shapely, voluptuous woman who they took her and they modeled Tinkerbell after her. A lot of people think that it was Marilyn Monroe, but it was actually Margaret Kerry. And if you are interested in seeing a video that I thought was really interesting, I saw this a couple of years ago, I think, Thingamablogs. Tiff did a video, which I will try to find and link down there for you. She did an interview with Margaret, Kerry, and they kind of talked about the history of Peter Pan from her perspective and like how she enjoyed the filming process and like what her experience was like. So that's really interesting. If you are interested, I will try to remember to find that and link that down below so you can check that out. My final voice actor piece of trivia is about Bobby Driscoll, who I mentioned was the first male voice of Peter Pan. He was the first male to play Peter Pan, and he had kind of an interesting life. He started off as a child actor, as you can imagine, and he kind of fell into the child actor curse. He played in the Song of the South, which I have never actually seen because I can't find it anywhere, because it's one of those pieces of Disney history that you just kind of like try to forget about. So he was Johnny in Song of the South. He was also Jim Hawkins in Treasure Island, and he did a few other Disney movies and some other voice work when he was young. And his life took quite a tragic turn. So if you are not into like the morbid stuff, then you can end the video here. That's the last thing I'm going to talk about. But if you are interested in seeing how the child actor curse kind of played in for Bobby Driscoll, then you can finish out the video here. After Peter Pan, when he was getting a little bit older, he started suffering from very bad acne, which I feel his pain, but that actually started affecting his ability to get roles. He was not being booked, he was not being cast, because he was no longer this like cute little kid. He was an adult, and he did not have the perfect male model look that people were looking for in the acting roles that they were trying to cast. So he started not getting work. He unfortunately turned to drugs. He was married at 19, divorced by 23, and he ultimately died at the age of 31. His body was found in an abandoned apartment in New York, and no one knew who he was. So he was buried just in a pauper's grave as a John Doe, and then a year or so later, they were able to eventually identify by his fingerprints they had taken at the time of death who he actually was. But by that time, the records had been lost. No one knew where he was, so no one knows where Bobby is buried to this day. So it was kind of a tragic end, and he was also kind of morbidly a little boy who never got to grow up. So that is it for my Peter Pan history and trivia. If you have any other facts about Peter Pan that you would like to share, let me know those down below. And if you have any suggestions for future movies that you'd like me to do some research on and give you some fun facts about, let me know those down below as well. And I will see you guys in my next video. Bye, y'all.